Hypixel SkyBlock is a game with a rich history in its 2 years of being up on the Hypixel network, with hundreds of thousands, even millions of unique players during that time. The game mode has had growing pains for sure, many islands being redone several times over, items being buffed and nerfed, players banned for exploits, which then get patched, only for more to take their place. The entire network even survived being forced to change providers in a couple days because of DDoS attacks on the entire Minecraft space. Despite how unbreakable SkyBlock might seem from our point of view, there are a few small changes, only a few lines of code long, that would bring the entire game mode to its knees. In this video, we're going to talk about 3 small changes that would kill Hypixel SkyBlock. So starting off, lots of OG Hypixel SkyBlock players would remember in the beginning that there was no limit to buying items at the NPC. People would spend hours sitting there buying materials to then use to craft gear and upgrade minions, with no limit to just how many items you can buy. The system wasn't perfect. At first, you could only click one item at a time, which was agonizingly slow, and you had to wait a third of a second between clicks, which was just terrible. Soon after, they did add a menu that allows buying multiple amounts in one click. For example, like, 8, 16, 32, 64. And eventually they finally got rid of the clicking limit, or at least they made it a lot more reasonable, and then we got the system that we have now, except without a buy limit, which was stupid overpowered at the time, considering you could just fill your inventory with, for example, string for very, very reasonable prices. When the Bazaar was added to the game, the admins also added a buy limit to NPCs, and people lost their minds on the forums. For days, you would see nothing but posts saying, "Oh, SkyBlock's dead, this is it, the game is ruined for me, it would ruin the economy, make everything too expensive, I'm not going to be able to afford my minions anymore." It's kind of funny looking back because, with the benefit of hindsight, I mean, it's no surprise that the forums are always over dramatic about everything. But what would happen though if you added an NPC sell limit, just like the buy limit? Well, actually, it turns out there is a limit, but it's so high that you wouldn't actually reach it unless you're doing something sketchy, like duping, or doing something really stupid, like trying to level yourself to Carpentry 50. Which is a cosmetic skill, by buying enchanted diamonds off the Bazaar and then crafting perfect armor only to sell it back to the NPC for some reason. I don't know, we do some weird things on the lemon profile. For our example here though, let's set the limit to 10 stacks per item per day, just like the buy limit. So the first thing is that players would be forced to stop using clay and snow minions. I did the math, and with enchanted lava buckets and diamond spreading, you would just barely be able to keep up with the sell limit yourself if you only collected 13 snow minions per day and sold the drops. And with clay, only 7. Not only would you be limited to 20 NPC sell price minions, but you would also have to collect the minions every single day to prevent overflow and not being able to sell all of your stuff. Then again, you could just sell your excess material to the Bazaar, where flippers would try and buy your clay or snow for slightly lower than an NPC price and then resell it at the NPC for a slight amount of profit. That's actually something that happens nowadays, but it would become a much more common strategy. And of course, people would be limited to 10 stacks per day, so there'd be a lot more flippers than there are people with those minions. The only other items that people could sell masses to NPCs, or the only ones they really care to, would be sugarcane, cobblestone, maybe sand, which generally most people would not actually reach the limit because NPC selling has become pretty niche nowadays, other than, those 2 minions, snow and clay. Considering just how many people would try to flip for Bazaar profit, SkyBlock would likely survive, and as a matter of fact, probably not change all that much at all if players changed nothing and just sold to the Bazaar, so crisis averted, I guess. But what would happen if you remove the NPC sell price completely? Well, that's when things get a little bit more dramatic. Absolutely, snow and clay minions would become completely useless. The NPC sell price also, people don't really consider this, but the sell price of NPCs serves as like a bottom for a lot of Bazaar items, since flippers would be able to again buy slightly lower than NPC price and then flip. If that mechanism wasn't there, the supply could drown out the demand for items like sugarcane, gold, iron. This would hurt the game tremendously, leading to a massive shift in the meta. Normally ignored crops like potato and wheat would likely become somewhat meta again, when crops like sugarcane would probably half or even quarter in price. There'd be a massive evening out of all money-making methods in the game, including which minions people pick, leading to an increased supply in everything from, again, gold, iron, diamonds, especially diamonds. Diamonds spreading as a concept wouldn't even really make sense anymore if you couldn't sell to NPC. It would be terrible. Like, every item in the game would drop to such a low value because all the people that are just farming coins from these minions would have to switch to something else, increasing the supply without the demand going up, and there'd be no mechanism for the price to bottom out, so it'd be really damaging to the game. Another thing to consider when all of the items in the game that sell in the bazaar basically dropping below NPC price would lead to power creep by allowing early game players to afford gear that they shouldn't be able to with very few coins. Removing NPC selling altogether would kill the economy of SkyBlock. It'd be pretty disastrous. The only way you'd really be able to enjoy the game anymore as intended would be by playing an Iron Man profile. So that was the first way to kill SkyBlock, just remove the NPC sell limit. For 2 years, players have been grinding skills and coins, collecting weapons, armor, pelts, building massive farms in their islands, some even getting special collectible items from staff. What would happen if all of that was set back to zero? Every single player on the network reset to the start. No profiles other than one default with completely empty banks, inventories, no skills, no island. The idea behind why something like this would happen could come from the fact that all of this time SkyBlock's been a prototype game mode. They made it clear that with the official release of the game and version 1.0 that they would rebalance everything in the game, from gear to bosses, XP amounts, RNG drop rates. This would be the quote perfect time to give the game a hard reset to break in the new meta changes. Of course, I would not agree with something like this happening, and considering the theme of this video, I'll explain to you why a reset would be terrible for SkyBlock. My prediction is that immediately, like, half the player base would quit for good. Anyone who's dumped at least a few hundred hours into the game would likely never come back. Their trust in the game mode would be broken. Who's to say they won't reset the game again? Especially the endgame player base would be hit the hardest. Some players have over 5,000 hours in this game over 2 years, which, by the way, is like an average of 7 hours a day, every day, for 2 years. That's along the lines of what I've been doing, just pointing that out, and would never be able to stomach doing it all again just to recover what they lost. Some of the more casual players might stick around. They'd be willing to start over again because maybe it wasn't that big a priority for them. Maybe they didn't really care too much about progression. I guess I can somewhat relate to that. You know, I've got a Fallout Shelter app on my phone that I've probably started over like 3 times at this point. It's a fun game for me. I'm not too concerned about being at the complete end of it. So maybe from that perspective, a lot of the casual players would still play. Lots of YouTube content creators would probably quit. The current generation of YouTubers would probably experience a massive amount of burnout and demotivation. Players would probably not watch the same content over and over again, so the Let's Play format would be killed off for the game, at least in the short term. This would hurt the game mode a lot, considering new content will be much less frequent from YouTubers and streamers, bringing less new players to the game. And the current players that are there would just be less engaged. I predict that in the first few weeks of a reset, players would gravitate to dungeons for fast progression and gear. Dragon fights have fallen out of the meta pretty hard, and without some sort of shift in the meta, even without an abundance of gear from dragons, like, you know, multiple sets of dragon armor, I just don't think players would bother with it, honestly. I think people would grind coins, though, and I think the easiest way people to do that would probably be building farms on their island and participating in Jacobs contests Farming is one of the lowest barrier to entry coin making methods in the game, so players would probably embrace it. Using the coins they got from farming, they'd be able to then buy gear from the chests and dungeons. And again, considering a reset would happen with 1.0 and a complete shift in the meta, maybe a lot of that gear will actually be helpful, because right now like 90% of the gear you get in dungeons is absolute garbage. But that being said, maybe dragons would actually be worthwhile. Who knows? It's likely that any player that spent money on the game would get refunded their gems, so most likely after a reset there'd be an influx of booster cookies. Just so many people trying to cash in on all of those gems they bought over the months and months in the previous iteration of the game, which would bring the price of booster cookies lower than we've probably ever seen them, especially if you combine it with the fact that no one has coins because the game would be so quote new. I would find it really interesting just to see how long it takes for the sweats in the player base to get from absolutely nothing to consistently killing tier 4 void glooms. My prediction's probably 3 to 4 months, likely with resources pooled from guilds. These players would be able to share their profits with the rest of the guild, bringing prices back to normal levels after a while with drops. It would make sense to say that the progression in this game and coin making and all that is way more efficient the farther you get in the game. So most likely all aspects of the game, at least in the first few months, will be democratized like this, and within a few months every aspect of the game will already be crowded with players. There'll already be sweats because like a whole guild just gave all their stuff to one guy. He got the best gear he could and then just shredded whatever it was bosses and just gave the profit to everybody, and they all got built up to that level. Do I think that a reset would kill SkyBlock for good? No, I do think that there would be rippling effects for years, but the game mode would probably still maintain a sizable player base and slowly recover what they lost. New content creators would get popular, new players would pick up the game, and those that stuck around since the reset could still be kept engaged by continued updates. The game mode would definitely struggle more with a reset than something like disabling NPC selling, but there's one more change I thought of that would absolutely kill the game. People oftentimes regard 2b2t as the oldest anarchy server in Minecraft, and if this update happens that I'm about to say, Hypixel SkyBlock would become the largest anarchy server in Minecraft. So imagine if the SkyBlock staff just decided suddenly, you know what, we're turning off keep inventory, we're turning on PvP. This one would be bad. Some demented part of me wants to see just how much the network would crash and burn if Hypixel did this as some like April Fool's prank, and then the whole network would just get reset the next day back to where it was. But seriously, what would happen? The killing other players part actually has already happened a few times before. I remember the apocalypse that was launch day for Pets v2, when players such as Mindtrix just killed other players with the Wither Skeleton pet ability. It was a mess. Also,
I got bullied for time to go with the growing pet.
Yeah, let's just
Players oftentimes complain on the forums that they lost hundreds of millions of coins to dying without a cookie buff, either because it timed out when they weren't paying attention or they lost it due to some bug. Imagine the number of people complaining that would come from their entire inventory being wiped because they fell off the edge into their pumpkin farm, or they got killed by some player that had like 10 times better gear than they had. Every item in the game would probably rise in price because grinders would not be as efficient due to being careful not to die to other players, or maybe they'd use worse gear that's more disposable. Most equipment in the game would, again, probably, at least most of the equipment being used would be disposable, and there'd be like kits and chests. I can imagine a bunch of dungeons equipment finally becoming useful because the stats aren't bad once you get a decent catacombs level and all that. But rarer talismans would likely fall out of use, and the cheaper ones would rise in price to compensate for just how many times people would need to rebuy them. Services like semi-full accessory bags and kits would probably become popular. I'm curious how these transactions would take place though, considering players could kill each other. I don't know. I saw a video where 2b2t actually had bots deliver kits in shulker boxes to players, like a completely automated pathfinding bot, which would be really interesting if something like that was in SkyBlock. Maybe people would pay coins over the auction house on some unrelated item, and then it would just be flagged as a purchase, and then the bot would just be sent to a lobby to party you and give you the stuff. I don't know. All private islands would probably be permanently closed if they're smart, and warp scrolls would become much more valuable since it would allow people to avoid the new most dangerous location in the game, which would be the village. Because the Hypixel SkyBlock community has some really toxic players, especially in the endgame community, it would likely be common for players in 3/4 Necron armor with Warden helmet just to sit on top of the buildings and bow down any new players that spawn in front of the portal with a juju bow, and just kill everyone that that just starts out their game. It would be the worst. Imagine going AFK on your island just to get kicked to the hub and then die to some guy with a juju bow bowing you down. Lots of players' items would probably be lost to just despawns or server closes or just being ignored by the troll that killed them, since, you know, what endgame player would want to grab their 100th grappling hook? This would provide an incentive for players to kill other players in order to get better gear, which means that it would technically become a PvP game mode, immediately breaking the Minecraft EULA and forcing the game to either shut down, remove the entire bits, cookie, and gem system, or to make everything free. All of these options are terrible. Also, as you can imagine, with PvP game modes, there would be an incentive to hack, and Watchdog would then need to be fully active in SkyBlock, causing massive lag. It goes without saying, but most of the player base would quit, and SkyBlock would become a barren wasteland ruled by hackers. The lack of funding from not being able to sell gems anymore would mean no more developer updates, and a lack of support for fixing exploits and dupes, letting them spiral out of control and ruining the economy. Then SkyBlock would literally become a massive MMO version of 2B2T before finally closing after however long Simon decides to let the game sit and just hemorrhage Hypixel's money. This is most likely the most extreme apocalypse scenario that SkyBlock could ever go through. Well, that's it for the video, guys. What other seemingly small changes do you think would kill the game? If this video hits 20,000 likes, or let's be honest, it'll probably, even if it doesn't, I'll do a part 2 for your top suggestions in the comments down below. But seriously, this game is a lot more fragile than you would think. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to, again, leave a like or subscribe if you want to see more content like this. But for now, I guess that's it. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys later.